Hello and welcome. We are so glad that you joined us again. We're calling, as of right now, we're calling this Apply the Word. It'll probably become something else, something much cooler that like Kogan comes up with on our team, if we're going to be honest. But for us, this is our opportunity as a discipleship team here at Summit to talk about, hey, how do we apply the Word that we've heard on Sunday into our everyday life? This last Sunday, we hit Romans chapter 13. And through that process of going to Romans chapter 13, we begin to talk about government and authority. If you've not heard that talk yet, or you weren't able to be there on Sunday, check out the link below. It's got a link to Todd's sermon. You'll be able to get caught up on that. But this week, we want to talk specifically about how do we apply that to our life. And my question is this: what do we do if we become cynical or bitter at all of our government, right? Maybe we feel that way. Maybe I'm just asking that question for myself, all right? So my first question to you guys, Tia, I'd love to hear from you here. Do you think it's wrong to feel bitter or cynical? What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like it is okay. I think that all of our emotions are okay. I mean, God has given us emotions. I think that's totally fine. I think, however, we, like with any emotion that we have a choice in what we do with it. And so I think if we are feeling bitter or cynical, we can either do one of two things. We can let it sit and fester. We can continue to complain, and we can play into that and play it up and only have conversations that further grow that bitterness. Or we can take it, we can honestly surrender it to the Lord and allow him to use that to actually maybe make a difference, whatever area you're becoming bitter or cynical with, especially when we're talking about government. We've been given a voice, and God calls us to be advocates for his people. And we have an opportunity to really share the love of Christ. So I think if we can take that and use it almost as fuel for our fire of, I'm going to make a difference, I'm going to serve, I'm going to share my voice, I'm going to do something about this and not just let it sit. So we have a choice. Is it healthy? It can become really unhealthy if not dealt with, but I think it really can drive us in the right direction.
Do you think, though, there's a line between passion for something and bitterness that takes us down that dark road?
Yeah, I mean, I think, though, honestly, Chad encouraged me with this maybe a month or so ago, when I was feeling really frustrated by something and feeling maybe a little passionate and honestly becoming a little bit bitter, and sharing that with him. And he encouraged me with the fact that people are not the enemy, but we have a true enemy, and he is present, and he wants to distract us and frustrate us and keep us inactive and ineffective as believers. And so I think that we have to, though, remember that and shift our perspective sometimes, that the people that we feel like we're fighting against, we're really not fighting. I mean, they are a person who is passionate about their perspective, just like you're passionate about your perspective. But where the breakdown happens is where the enemy is coming in and is trying to really kind of drive that wedge in. Is disunify a word? I don't know if that's a word, but you know what I'm saying? Like really basically like, separate us. And so I think that we have to keep that at the forefront of our minds, of like people and their agendas and their perspectives, like they're not the enemy, but we have a true enemy, and we have to remember that.
Yeah, I think that that's so important as we talk through a lot of this, right? Because so often when we just focus on what someone says and we forget the people in the midst of it, I think that really it slants us, and we become bombarded with the information, right? And and then that's like all we hear, and then we put everybody in camps and all, you know what I mean?
Right.
Their side and our side and all these kind of things, and and we miss the human element and all those kind of things. So Nathan, give us some advice here, my friend. As we're beginning to think through this, how do we continue to be people that come at this on a practical level for ourselves? If we are beginning to feel bitterness and being cynical, that's not leading to a passion, that's not leading to change for us, but it's just something that's like stewing inside of us. What do we do, and how do we start that process?
Yeah, we could move to Canada. I mean,
I'm gonna guess they got their own problems.
Oh, that's probably
but
true.
They do have maple syrup.
They do. I was on the treadmill this morning at the gym, and I was thinking about this question.
Humble brag right there. Okay.
Oh yeah. And I was trying to just stay focused, listen to a podcast, but they had 5 TVs in front of me, and they had every kind of cable news you can imagine, and left and right, literally and figuratively, and and it was funny because I was sitting there watching them report on the same stories, and yet they were reporting totally different headlines, totally different stories. Found myself not listening to the podcast. I was reading the subtitles and what all they were talking about, and it just made me realize that the reason I can become bitter and cynical is when I feed my mind with all this stuff that's slanted one way or another, and I can lie to myself and think, oh, they're telling me the truth. Those other people are lying, rather than just realizing that everybody's really coming in with a slant. And so, and a lot of times they're bitter at somebody on the other side. And so every story and every talking head is sitting there telling me something that just makes me more and more bitter. And I really had to not watch a lot of cable news, just because I want my mind to be focused on something more important than that. Not that those issues aren't important, but I know I'm not getting it straight. And so I think that's what I've had to do to help me not be passionate or bitter.
I think that's huge. I think it's very much this like thing that we've often heard as kids. Like I can hear my mom saying like garbage in, garbage out. You know what I mean? And when when we're constantly getting our view of the world and the people and our community from places that are negative, we will tend to be negative, right? And so I think it's important that we and I don't think any of us are like advocating like, okay, here's the thing, build a bunker, get in it, we'll come out in 30 years and see if it's better. But I think
take lots of dry goods.
Right. But I think one of the things that is important in this as we think through it is that we're also allowing God, His Word, time in prayer, worship, those kind of things to be things that are filling both our mind and our heart. And I think over time, and I think this is what really changes our bitterness into passion, is when we allow the Word of God and the compassion for His people to really grab a hold of our heart. And then we see these things, and instead of leading us to a place of bitterness or cynical, it leads us to a place of compassion and love, right? Because I mean, those are the things of God, and so it should turn our hearts to it in the same way. And so then our bitterness is this, like, I mean, to use a biblical phrase, this like righteous anger, you know what I mean? That leads to change instead of us just like stewing and throwing our hands up and go, well, what do we do? Because I think sometimes we can become, I think some of our bitterness comes because we feel helpless, right? It's like, what do I do with this? All right, Tia, give us final thoughts on this whole subject. Wrap it up clean for us.
Okay.
What do we need to know?
Well, I will say, as you were just speaking about that, because I think sometimes it does become overwhelming of like, I do feel this like uprising of something, but I don't know what to do about it, you know? And so I first would just encourage you to serve, just start serving, whether that's in the church or outside of the church. If there is like a people group that just gets at your heartstrings, find an organization. Nathan knows a ton of organizations that you can go and start serving, so you can be the hands and feet of Jesus, and that you can be active in seeing improvement happen. I will say another thing that gives me peace in these times of frustration is a phrase that I say all the time, like, God will deal. We all will stand in front of our Creator one day, and we will have to stand in judgment for all the things that we have said and we've done, like every single one of it. And it just levels the playing field for me, like having that perspective of knowing, like, we're going to have to experience that. And so I have peace in knowing that God is in control, and whether whether God acts in justice here on earth or in heaven, it's going to happen. And so I think that's where my peace comes from, of like, I don't need to worry about this situation or this moment or this conversation that's happening or in our government, because God is in control, and I can trust what he's going to do on this earth and in heaven, and God will deal, and it will be fantastic.
Yeah, that's huge. I think that's so important to remember. I think in the bombardment of everything we hear in social media and on news and all these kind of things, it seems so big and daunting, and we just want to like pull the covers back up and go back to sleep. But I think it's important to remember that all through specifically New Testament, the call is to love our neighbor. And I think so often we see ourselves, middle of Oklahoma. How do we fix our government? How do we fix this country?
Right.
And we often forget that God's calling us to love our neighbor.
Right.
And I think we become bitter and cynical when we want change to happen at a macro scale.
Yeah.
And God's going, no, I'm dealing with your heart and your neighbor.
Yeah.
You're worried about what some congressman is doing and some president's doing. That I just want you to show some love to the dude, on cue. And so let's not miss those opportunities to make real change inside our community, inside our church, to be disciples, to make disciples, to be a city set upon a hill, to be salt and light, all of these kind of things. Hey, thank you so much for joining us. Check out the sermon in the link below. I've also got a couple other links or some things for you to check out. If you want to continue to grow and learn on this topic of government authority, we want to encourage you, read the first part of Daniel. Check that out. Go there. At least Daniel 1-9 is a great place for you to start in some of your reading. Also, I've linked below a video from the guys at the Bible Project talking specifically about living in exile. I think it's some great thoughts on what it means to be a follower of Christ in a world that may not be honoring to him. So, hey, I love you guys. We love you so much from Discipleship Team here at Summit. We'll see you guys next week.